Alright, so you booted up Tekken, and you want to play as a girl with a little bit of melanin. If you're like me, you look at Katarina and she seems too easy, and you look at Master Raven and she seems too hard. Well, congratulations, my friend, have I got the fighter for you. Josie Rizal is a multi-talented fighter who uses Eskrima-based Muay Thai and hails from the Philippines. What does this mean? Well, she's brown and has some violent knee and elbow strikes that you can use to keep your opponent in check. If you're more familiar with Tekken, I'd say she's like a weird fusion of a Mishima, Dragunov, and has a little sprinkle of Bryan for good measure. I say that because she seems to steal tools from all these characters. She's got a Mishima-esque 1-2-2, a Bryan-esque hatchet kick, an orbital heel style move, and a Dragunov-esque down forward 2, along with a wall running move that can be used to gain frame advantage. She even has a really good wall standing launcher, but we'll get into that later. Now, what kind of playstyle does Josie have? Most people would say that she's a poke-heavy, rushdown character, which is certainly partially accurate. She has some pretty solid poke tools, but I'm gonna say right now that if you try to play her like Kazumi, you're really not using her to her full potential. The reality is that Josie is a counter-hit baiting / frame trap oriented character. She's got numerous tools that on counter hit result in some hilarious damage that when properly applied will even make Leroy players cry OP please nerf. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to focus on a few of them, and then talk about how to condition your opponent to acquire those sweet counter hits. First, you have to know what her counter hit options are. Forward +3 is my personal favorite. It's completely safe on block at -3, so you won't have to stop your momentum if you don't get a counter hit. But if you do, a simple 1 or 2 jab will float your opponent for a free combo. Scared of combos? Don't worry. Besides one very specific combo, Josie isn't a super execution heavy character. Look, if you can perform a crouch dash and press forward 2-3-4, then congrats, you have a grasp on almost the entirety of Josie's bread and butter combos. Don't get me wrong, there's still some challenging execution requirements at the higher end of the Josie combo spectrum. But this isn't nearly as important for Josie as being able to hit confirm. And seriously, if you're able to crank out crouch dashes on the fly, your opponent will probably take more damage from a crouch dash 3, crouch dash 4 no mix-up than any bread and butter that you hit them with. Josie's other counter hit options are as follows. Back 2, magic 4, crouch dash 3, crouch dash 1+2, switch stance 1, switch stance 2, switch stance 3. Did I mention switch stance earlier? I'll get into switch stance in a second actually, but first let's talk about conditioning. Conditioning is a fighting game concept that acknowledges that you are fighting another human being. Your opponent has desires, dreams, and goals that run counter to your own. As a counter hit based character, your job is to use conditioning to crush those dreams violently, destroy their passion, make their goals impossible. This is accomplished by using frame traps. What is a frame trap, you ask? A frame trap is when you trick your opponent into thinking that they can push buttons, when in reality, pushing buttons is the worst idea ever. This is accomplished using moves that give you frame advantage, and then filling in your counter hit attack of choice. For Josie, this means using your 1 jab, standing 3, crouch dash 1+2, and other moves like her wall running 3 to maintain a heavy frame advantage over your opponent, which will cause your moves to come out before their moves, thus resulting in a counter hit. Tekken does counter hits a lot differently than Street Fighter or other more traditional fighting games. Counter hits in Tekken don't usually grant an extra few frames of frame advantage, but instead imbue a move with new properties that are significantly less boring than on regular hit. Returning to Josie's forward 3, we can see that on normal hit, the move is already deeply unrewarding. It doesn't lead to extra damage, and as far as mids go, you're better off using Josie's neutral 3 as a mid poke. But on counter hit, this move allows Josie to yoink up to 60 points of damage or more. And don't forget, the move on block is only -3, so combined with some other tools, you can really take advantage of conditioning. If you use Josie's neutral 3-3 and combine it with some well-placed lows, you can really start to make her opponent think that 1 jab into forward 3 is not only a safe block string, but truly the most bullshit mix-up in the game. Her neutral 3 is a fast mid poke, and although the follow-up 3 is a duckable high, the second hit of her 3-3 string is only -1 on block. Her neutral 3-2 can also be used as a double mid, but this is where Josie's bag of tricks really starts to open up. Remember switch stance? I know you do. You've been dying to hear about this thing. Josie's switch stance is directly tied to her crouch dash. Her switch stance can be entered by using her down forward 4, which, while a slower mid-strike than neutral 3, it immediately puts her into switch stance. This is important because it is the only mid that takes her into a pure switch stance. All other methods require a high attack, which is easily duckable. Her neutral 3-2 forward does take her into crouch dash, but you can't get into switch stance from a crouch dash, so this has more situational uses. This is important to remember because you have less options in crouch dash than you do in switch stance. Switch stance is essentially Josie's one big gimmick that keeps people like the main man Sui from calling her an honest character. It's a mix-up that your opponent is forced into, no matter if it's hit or blocked. Josie's down forward 4 puts you at a supermassive frame advantage. From switch stance, not only do you get 4 different strikes that cover low, mid, and high, but if you hold forward you can immediately enter a crouch dash without having to do a crouch dash input, which of course opens up the opportunity to give your opponent's ankles a hard and violent smack. Now, if you're just here to learn how to counter online Josie players, I'll tell you right now that the best answer is to duck when she wants to enter switch stance and not press a button until she either whiffs switch stance 1 or you block switch stance 3. Smart Josie players will see that you do this and start whipping out switch stance 2, and the Fiesta Party Josies will go all in and throw out switch stance 4. The smartest Josie players will instead realize that you're not pushing buttons, and that both switch stances 2 and 4 are both easily jab interruptible, and also not very rewarding without a counter hit. So instead they'll start using switch stance into crouch dash 4, or if they really feel like you've been conditioned a certain way, go for crouch dash 3. Anyway, if you're here for how to counter Josie, you can leave now because that's the best advice I can give you. The rest of you just need to work on your fundamentals and stop blaming the queen for all your problems. Outside of her switch stance and orbital heal, Josie really lacks any real gimmicks. The rest of her playstyle is based around strong fundamentals and the occasional set of rushdown tactics. Now, with that out of the way, let's take a second to get a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor is nobody but the people who support me on Patreon or on Ko-fi. If you want to keep my channel up and running and make sure that I don't starve, consider donating to my Ko-fi or joining my Patreon or subscribing to me on Twitch, because I'm not going to take a Skillshare sponsorship, and I fucking hate Raid Shadow Legends. Switch stance is basically just a very useful counter hit setup tool that by nature of online play is pretty easy to abuse. But if your opponent is smart enough to not push buttons during it, switch stance can become more of a hindrance than an instant win tool. If you start to notice that your opponent is easily blocking or ducking your switch stance moves, or really generally not pushing buttons during it, you need to stop using it and, as much as possible, utilize her down 4, her neutral 3, her back 4, and her crouch dash 4, more often to poke your opponent to death. Moving on from switch stance, Josie's lows are the definition of death by 1,000 cuts, and you must treat them as such. But you also must never, ever use down 3. Down 3 on paper is a really cool move when combined with the follow-up 4. It's a low followed by a high that immediately enters switch stance, and at the lower levels of play, might actually cause some trouble for your opponent. But once you start facing opponents that duck with intent, you'll find that down 3 is more trouble than it's worth outside of combos. The move is frankly a noob trap, so if you really want to hit your opponent's legs, focus on using down 4, down back 3, crouch dash 3, and even a cheeky down forward 3-2 forward crouch dash 3 to achieve those sweet ankle smacks. Simply put, don't waste your time with down 3. It's not worth it. Even using forward 2-3 is a better choice for scoring free smacks at the ankles than using down 3. Just don't accidentally hit 3 twice, because unless you get a counter hit, the third strike is wildly unsafe on block. And don't use forward 2-3-4 outside of combos either. The final hit is not a true combo, and is also duckable, so you put yourself at unnecessary risk by completing the string during the neutral game. This is actually a trick I stole from Ultra Instinct Josie, and I'm gonna come clean and tell you that the next section is just filled with tech I stole by watching their matches, so go check out their channel if you want to see some high-level Josie play that isn't Kagamaru or Porkchop. Now, let's talk about grabs. Outside of the back turned and side grabs, Josie has 3 choices when it comes to grabbing her opponent. 1+3, 2+4, and forward 3+4. You're really not going to get much mileage out of 1+3 unless you specifically don't want to switch sides with your opponent. But even then, you're usually going to be better off switching between 2+4 and her command grab. Josie's command grab is absolutely terrifying against a wall due to its ability to lead into a full wall splat combo. But more importantly, just like Kazuya and his command grab, you can do it out of a crouch dash to extend the range. This is a little bit difficult because you have to wait for the crouch dash to end, but you can buffer in a double forward input to get the grab, or her forward +3. This will massively up the threat of your crouch dash against opponents who can react to the crouch dash 3 and react to your crouch dash 2. With all that out of the way, here are some of my favorite gimmicks to use with Josie online. Keep in mind that these are gimmicks, they won't always work, and you take a risk by doing them, but when they work, you're absolutely going to have a laugh. First up is 1-4 and then Magic 4. This is a really corny counter hit setup, but it's honestly one of my favorites and it works far more often than it should. The way it works is that there's just enough space for your opponent to do a move between the second hit of the string and a normal Magic 4. Do remember, however, that this is all highs, so if your opponent is smart enough to duck, this gimmick is going to get shut down incredibly quickly. But when it works, you can throw out a 3-3 for the spiral and then knock them for some health off your opponent. One jab back 2 loops. This is a loop for people who are terrified of ducking and too unaware of their own moveset to use a high crush move. It will stuff most armor moves during the startup and give you Okazemi. Both Josie's 1 jab and back 2 are +1 on block, which is partially how this loop works. That combined with back 2 being 14 frames on startup can lead to some hilarious ways of catching your opponent. Don't abuse this because it is a gimmick though, through and through, but when it lands you'll be laughing maniacally. 3-2 forward, crouch dash 1+2 loops. This is a little bit harder and it relies very heavily on your opponent being conditioned earlier to not press buttons. The 1+2 of this loop has to land as well, because you can be easily knocked out of the air, and if your opponent has some awareness of what's going on, then this can lead to a full combo. The 3 is minus on block, but the follow-up crouch dash 1+2 is plus on block, which allows you to set up frame traps, grabs, and it hits mid. On counter hit, 1+2 leads to a crumple, which can lead to massive damage. Down back 3 into full crouch down forward 4. This is super simple, yet super effective. You can use this towards the end of a match. It's very risky if your opponent blocks the full crouch down forward 4, but if they don't realize what's happening, you're gonna get a big chunk of your opponent's health. Alright, I've put it off long enough. Let's talk about While Standing 2-1. While Standing 2-1 is a 13 frame launcher that hits mid, then high, and it sets Josie up for some damaging combo potential. But I'll be completely honest here, I always just go for the down 3+4 follow-up. The move requires some strict microdash timing if you really want to get the follow-up down 3-4. And in the heat of a match, I find myself getting it maybe 1 in 13 tries. It's hard, but it's definitely doable within a match. I just don't go for it, and I try to play a more safe form of Josie that focuses on easier, more consistent combos. If you are interested in learning more about the While Standing 2-1 follow-up, I would really recommend checking out Furia's video on the subject, as they have presented it in a very clear and precise format. Anyway, I could go for hours talking about the nuances of Josie Rizal's playstyle, but I'll save that for my streams. If you enjoyed this video, consider shooting me a subscription over at cutebridge on Twitch, or sending me some money on Ko-fi, or just becoming one of my patrons. Patrons get a special credit at the end of my videos, and I wouldn't be able to make content without support from real human beings instead of mega corporations. Anyway, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.